There's a new study reveals that at UC San Diego, 12% of kids can barely do math at middle school level, while the school is among one of the top universities in the world. Our guest today is Pete Peterson. He's the Dean of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. He's here to tell us what's going on in California universities. At the same time, he's going to give us advice how to maximize the return on investment when we go to universities.
What's been revealed in this UC San Diego study is not just an indictment of the UC system, but it's really an indictment of our high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools. What happens when you welcome in students who are not academically prepared? One is they don't graduate with a degree. Second, they still have incurred student debt over the course of 1, 2, or 3 years.
I'm Siam Akorami. Welcome to California Insider. Pete, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Great to be here.
We want to talk to you about the higher education in California and California universities. UC San Diego, unfortunately, 12% of students can't do math at middle school level. What's going on?
Well, the origins of the problems that have been revealed in this new state legislative study on UCSD actually go back to the conditions of our grade schools, middle schools, and high schools. They were precipitated by the fact that in 2020, the University of California system decided not to use standardized testing to qualify students who were applying into the UC system. These have generally been very selective and highly regarded public universities across the state. But in 2020, in the wake and current conditions of COVID, the UC system, led by public officials of the state, decided to disconnect and not use standardized testing. The research found in the study on UC San Diego in particular, that really starting from that point, starting in 2020, we saw a significant decline in the academic quality of students who were going into the UC system. And in particular, in STEM skills, in math and science. In response, what the UC system did, the University of California system did, was introduce a whole array of remedial classes to try to address students who were underperforming. So you took very valuable parts of the curriculum and dedicated them toward these remedial classes that in most instances, certainly pre-2020, you would have seen students already qualified and essentially then to go from there on to deeper levels of math and science studies in the University of California system.
But these are still ranked among the top schools in the world. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, as with so many types of rankings, some of them are based on long-standing traditions and identities and, if you will, brands of these schools. One thing that California voters and taxpayers should know, that while this study was just on UC San Diego, what you're looking at is just one example of an entire public university-wide problem here in California, one that's supported and funded by taxpayers. This was a decision made by the University of California and its regents back in 2020. And at that time, this was one that we saw many colleges and universities, even what you might describe as some of our elite colleges and universities, also stopped using standardized testing. Over the last few years, we've seen a return to using those tests because many of Ivy League colleges and other public university systems have realized that when they stopped using standardized tests, they saw a dramatic drop-off in the academic quality of the students who were coming into their programs.
So do you think these students would graduate from these schools, or do you think they will not make it? Do you think they will have to make it easier for these students to graduate, or?
Well, this is also, I think, an untold story that is related to welcoming in students who are not academically prepared to essentially succeed in these programs, whether it's the University of California or Harvard or Columbia, it doesn't matter where. is you tend to see a larger percentage of dropouts by these students in their sophomore and junior years, frankly, because they're not academically prepared to succeed in these programs. That's not to say that they couldn't succeed in another type of program, or to go, say, in California, to go to a community college to start. That probably would be a better route. But what happens when you welcome in students who are not academically prepared, two things happen. One is they don't graduate with a degree. Second, they still have incurred student debt over the course of 1, 2, or 3 years. So really what we've done is we've set these students up for failure, not only academically, but also financially. And that's the thing that I think, especially in the University of California system, for taxpayers here in California that are supporting these programs to the tune of billions of dollars, that's the thing that even if you're really much more of a mindset that we should be providing as many opportunities for students as possible, we need to acknowledge that the system as currently situated is actually setting students up for failure, not just academically, but also financially.
So these students that are coming in with that are having poor performances in high schools, they're going to end up getting the debt, and they might not make it.
That's right. And I think the other part that I think is maybe the shoe that has to drop here is the awareness that what's been revealed in this UC San Diego study is not just an indictment of the UC system, but it's really an indictment of our high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools. These are students who have not been prepared at the levels at which we have tasked our public high schools and middle schools to essentially teach our students to be ready for success at the higher education level.
Do you think these students should not make it to graduate from high school if they don't have a middle school level math? Or do you think they're getting easily passing through somehow?
Yeah, no, there's evidence that that is indeed happening. There have been a number of stories told, even in AP level high school classes, where students are doing well grade-wise for the class, but they're still failing the standardized AP test. And so we have evidence already here in California at the high school level that there's a differentiation between the grades that they're getting on their report cards and what happens when they actually take the standardized test. That's an indictment of our public high school system. And that could be seen across the board, I'm sure, in a number of different ways. But I also want to make sure that we're not condemning these students, right? They're obviously doing, in many instances, the best they can. They are taking the classes that they're receiving. But really an administration at the high school level and teachers who know that their students are not being adequately prepared, I think that's really where we need to focus our attention. How is it that we see this dramatic difference between grades that students are getting on their report cards that then get reported to the UC system, essentially letting them know as a signal they did very well in classes, but then when it comes time to take the standardized AP tests, we're seeing dramatic failure rates there.
Do you think it's easier for kids to get better grades because the teachers want to motivate them, or do you think there's other reasons?
In this area, as in many areas, the impact of COVID on this generation of high school and college students, it's going to take years to fully consider and understand the terrible impact that the closure of schools, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, had on a generation of California students. I think what we're seeing now at the college level is, in part, directly connected to the closure of schools that we saw several years ago here in California. So part of this is the responsibility of teachers, administrators, certainly on the students themselves. But we also should remember that very pivotal date of 2020, when the UC system decided to no longer use standardized tests, essentially they were sending a signal that they were going to prioritize other things other than merit for acceptance into the UC system. But what we're seeing at the higher education level is really the impact of, in some ways, of the closure of schools back in 2019 and 2020. We were told for many years, you might remember, during the time of closure, that education officials here in the state of California were saying kids are resilient. We're giving just the same level of education to these kids when the schools were closed as when they were there in person. It's really in the children's best interest that we close these schools. And here we are 5 years later, and I can guarantee this is going to be something we're going to be seeing, the reverberations of those school closure decisions. We're going to be seeing the negative reverberations on California students for many years to come.
Have they changed the way they are qualifying students now with the standardized test at UC schools?
This was a national issue where you did see across the country during COVID and certainly afterwards, you saw a number of both public and private institutions no longer use standardized tests. What you've seen just over the last couple of years is many of those institutions, especially ones that one might call elite institutions in the Ivy Leagues and non-Ivy League schools that had stopped using standardized testing are now returning to it. The University of California system has not made that decision yet. My bet is in the coming years, it's going to follow what these other colleges and universities, both public and private, have done and return to these standardized tests. You know, the thing that's so fascinating about the debates and discussions around when many of these programs stopped using standardized tests back in 2019 and 2020 was that they were seen as being so-called racist. But when you look at the history of standardized tests, they were really put in the first place to make it possible for all students, whatever their racial background was, whatever their ethnic background was, whether they were male or female, to qualify for higher education in systems that in many ways had only looked out for those who had direct connections to get into places like Harvard or Columbia or Stanford. These standardized tests were provided as an opportunity to really solicit in a meritocratic system the best of the best, no matter who you were, no matter where you came from, no matter what your family background was. And of course, in the wake of 2019 and 2020, these were seen as being so-called racist. What we've seen now in the implications of stepping away from standardized tests and using other criteria is, again, we've set up a generation of students for failure, again, both academically. There could be other places they could go. This is not to say that the University of California system is the only, I know a number of parents whose kids did not get into University of California systems, right? But it is a way of saying that, one, we need to look very closely at how our high schools have been underperforming and preparing students for higher education, and we need to look very closely at our University of California system and what it values for the students it's accepting, and how we are engaging students who may not be ready for the University of California system and its education, but there can be other pathways for higher education that we can support these students.
There's some really good news. Shen Yun is coming back to California. If you haven't seen Shen Yun, make sure to check it out. This show is amazing. It's showing what China used to be before communism. And I've been going to it every year. It's reviving this ancient culture that's been lost. If you have heard something negative about the show, just be mindful that the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to shut them down since their inception. They're showing what China used to be, and they're trying to revive the traditional culture of the Chinese people. Chinese Communist Party has been trying to eliminate this culture. And now Shen Yun has been growing across the globe, and they're performing everywhere in a lot of different countries. Let me show you a quick trailer for what Shen Yun looks like this year.
A performance that truly matters for each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. Shen Yun. Get tickets now at shenyun.com.
many people that graduate from these universities, they end up with debt.
Yeah.
They end up with, on average, about $40,000 of debt,
Right.
which is not a lot compared. Some of these schools have very high tuition. And is it still worth it for people to pursue the higher education?
So I'm pretty biased as an academic administrator. I think higher education is extremely valuable in both socializing and preparing students of any background for success in life. There's a networking component. There have been research studies done that show that the earning potential of college students still far surpasses those who do not have a college education. So I think a college education, by and large, is a very positive step to consider. That being said, the debt problem is a real problem. And I think we need to be very mindful of the increasing costs of higher education, what those are based on. I think students and parents who are considering higher education need to be much better consumers, right? So that we really need to be thinking about what are the majors within higher education that tend to have what you might call a good ROI, a return on investment. There's some great work that's being done both out of the American Enterprise Institute and a think tank called FreeOp that is actually analyzing return on investment for specific majors within specific colleges and universities.
You are an expert in free speech on universities, and this has been part of the discussion as well. Some people say that there's one of the reasons people go to universities is to get exposed to a lot of different ideas and thoughts and debate, and some of that has changed. Can you tell us what's going on that front?
I think this is one of the things that I am both most concerned about, but also very optimistic about regarding what's been happening on college campuses just over the last few years. I would argue when we look back decades from now at the history of American higher education, we're going to see 4 pivotal historic moments that have really changed the course of free speech on American college campuses. Number 1 was COVID. And when many college classrooms and high school classrooms became living rooms for many with the closure of these programs, I think a lot of parents learned what was being taught. So I think there was an awareness of the highly ideological, partisan type of education that we were offering in high schools and also colleges and universities. Second was the post-October 7th protests, 2023, on many college campuses, whether we're talking about Columbia and Harvard or out here in California on UCLA, USC, Long Beach State, Stanford. And I think those protests really woke up a lot of Americans to the fact that there was a significant level of anti-Semitism on many of our campuses, but there was really a great degree of anti-Americanism that we witnessed on many of these college campuses. This understanding of oppressor and oppressed, this language that we saw many students using during these protests. I think a lot of Americans saw that for the first time. Thirdly, the election of President Trump in 2024. And what's happened since then, just in this last year, I can say as a college administrator, the Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security have been much more engaged in the foreign funding of American colleges and universities that have had an impact on what is being taught and said on college campuses. I think we're becoming much more aware of the import and problems with foreign funding into American higher education. At the same time, we're seeing also the withholding of research funding as a way of essentially encouraging these colleges and universities. We've seen that at UCLA. We're seeing that at Stanford here in California. To promote more what we're calling viewpoint diversity in hiring and in student recruitment. Certainly many of the administrative programs are being called into question that have prevented free speech. And then finally, the fourth, I would say, the very tragic murder of Charlie Kirk. He was obviously America's great voice, I think, for viewpoint diversity, free speech, academic freedom more broadly on American college campuses. And for him to be murdered actually in the process of expressing and promoting and supporting free speech, I think was bewildering to many Americans. But if you're not 25 and younger, I don't think we fully understand the impact of that murder on a younger generation who, in many ways, and rightly so, saw Charlie as a hero, not only in the defense of free speech, specifically on college campuses, but also defending students of faith and discussing the importance of faith for a younger generation. And so those 4 historic moments that have just occurred here in the last 5 years, I think when we look back at the history of higher education and seeing the impact of those 4 events in making American donors, legislators, policymakers much more aware of the ideological capture of American higher education to better fund and engage and support more free speech on college campuses. I think those 4 historical moments are really, they set the foundation for the sea change that I see coming in the years and decades ahead.
In terms of the foreign, you said there's foreign funding. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Well, many of your listeners may be familiar when the story broke a number of years ago on the influence of these Confucius Institutes and Confucius Centers on a number of college campuses. They were essentially promoted as being just generally cultural institutions. They might be teaching Chinese as a language. What became revealed over time is many of them were being funded by the Chinese Communist Party and essentially became small installations or outposts of the Chinese Communist Party on an array of college campuses. That's a model that's now being followed by other countries. There was some stories written recently I saw in the Free Press about the influence of Qatar, for example, that we're seeing both in endowed professorships and foreign funding from that nation coming into the United States and American universities. That's influencing what's being taught in the classroom, who's teaching it, and the kinds of students that are being recruited in. So we're seeing, even in the Middle East, that's another region as well, that they see American colleges and universities as being that real tip of the spear, that connecting point where students are maturing, it is hoped, intellectually but also socially, and that's a place where they can exert direct influence. There's a new book out called Authoritarians in the Academy that covers not only the story of Chinese influence, but also just other nations see their ability to influence the next generation of Americans right there at those years between 18 and 22, that if they can involve themselves in our colleges and universities, they can really influence our next generation of Americans.
You mentioned there's changes with this new administration. How do those changes look like with California universities?
Well, we're seeing it firsthand with the step the Trump administration has taken with the withholding of federal research dollars. And I think it may have surprised a lot of Americans how many billions of federal dollars go into our colleges and universities. Here in California, when we look at our major research universities, certainly the University of California system is a set of research universities. But on the private side, we see that at Stanford and USC as well. UCLA is probably the biggest story where there's been a withholding of over $1 billion in federal research funds. It could certainly be argued that the research that many colleges and universities are doing that is funded by the federal government, essentially by the American taxpayer, is valuable, very important. A lot of medical research is happening. Other types of academic research is valuable. But what the Trump administration has understood is that if they want to use as to exert some sort of influence on the lack of viewpoint diversity and academic freedom on the university campus, the one lever that they have, or one of the levers they have, I should say, is on their ability to withhold federal research funds. And we've seen a number of cases in other universities. We've seen that at Columbia. We're seeing that at the University of Pennsylvania. We're seeing this in other colleges and universities, where because of the withholding of these research dollars, colleges and universities are reconsidering policies that they had around free speech, academic freedom, and viewpoint diversity more broadly. And so in these settlements, we certainly have seen anti-Semitism being addressed by many of these colleges and universities, viewpoint diversity either in academic hiring or recruitment, the allowance of speakers on campus to provide different points of view. They're doing this through that lever, if you will. Another thing that we're also seeing is through grants coming out of the Department of Education. We're seeing many more grants going out to colleges and universities to support programs that instill and support viewpoint diversity and the teaching of what you might call traditional American civics. Obviously, we have our 250th anniversary as a country coming up here in the next July 4th. And with that, the Trump administration has been very intentional through the Department of Education in supporting grant programs for colleges and universities across the country, but also here in California. I'll say in full disclosure, Pepperdine and our School of Public Policy has received some grant funding to, again, celebrate and accurately and in a balanced way portray the importance of the American experiment as we approach our 250th anniversary. So in part, it's withholding of grant funds to change policy at these colleges, but it's also through the offering of grant funds to develop programs that promote academic freedom and American civics.
When we talked to some professors on the show and off the records, they told us that in these universities, there's still a high regard for science, and a lot of them don't, even though they are not pro these DEI policies, even though they might be on the liberal side, and they didn't consider this as being a huge deal.
Right.
How bad is it from your perspective, this situation on campus?
Well, I think it really depends on the discipline. There's been some very good research done on the ideological imbalance in different disciplines. When you look at the natural sciences, when you look at engineering, when you look at physics, the ideological balance of faculty and the perception of ideological teaching, you don't see that as much in the natural sciences and in, again, courses, majors or disciplines like physics or even economics to a degree. When you get more into the social sciences, when you look at history, when you look at sociology, when you look at the whole field of communications, right? Who are the next generation of people sitting in your chair, right? The people that are going to be journalists. When you look at journalism programs, the ideological balance swings dramatically. What does that mean for the student? It means for the student that if you're a sociology major, or if you're a psychology major, or if you're a communications major, you may never hear a different political point of view. And that ideological influence actually can work within the discipline as well. It changes what can be researched. It changes the kind of students that feel welcomed in these programs. And so it's fair to say that you can find ideological balance in more the natural sciences, mathematics, again, physics and engineering. But as you go into a whole array of other disciplines, the ideological imbalance and influence swings dramatically.
You mentioned research, these ideological things, what can be researched. Can you tell us about the impact of this research?
Yeah. Let's look at history. How much great research has been done on the success of the Reagan administration? How much great research has been done on the problems inherent in communism or socialism? If you compare that with the promotion of socialism in other disciplines, I mentioned before that historical moment that we're going to see, again, have what I would argue to be positive reverberations, but precipitated by the great tragedy of October 7th, 2023, what we saw on college campuses. I think a lot of Americans, when they heard in the days and weeks following October 7th that Israel was being called an oppressor or a colonial nation, I think they were just absolutely dumbstruck to say, How could a nation that suffered the loss of well over 1,000 lives and the attempted murder, the rape and the injury of thousands more, how could that nation, how could Israel be considered an oppressor nation? That's a whole stream of thought that comes out of critical theory that sees the world in this bifurcated way that you're either the haves or have-nots. You're the oppressor or oppressed. You're either the colonizer or the colonized. And again, that used to be just sequestered in one kind of a very small academic department. That has now bled through a whole array of different academic disciplines, from history to sociology to international studies. And those are the areas, again, which have become highly ideological. It becomes very difficult if you're a conservative student to do well in those programs.
Some of those research becomes material for the reporters.
Yeah.
And if you want to look at an issue, if there's only one side, research on one side, you end up reporting on that research.
That's absolutely true. And one of the untold stories is something that we're getting involved with at Pepperdine in the School of Public Policy. Just in the last couple of years, the University of California system, funded by American taxpayers along with labor unions, has created a network of labor economic centers that now is, there's a labor economic center institute at each one of the UC systems, UC colleges. These are often quoted by journalists when they want to do research on minimum wage in California. They'll quote one of these labor researchers that are funded both by California taxpayers as well as labor who have a great reason to support minimum wage. Most economists would say that minimum wage is a bad idea in broad strokes. But if you're only going to quote these labor centers at UC systems, they still have the appearance of being an academic research center, but they're really very biased in the kind of research they're doing.
So what's the solution to this?
I would argue introducing competition, whether it's from places like Pepperdine or others, to show, one, that there are other institutions that are bringing a balanced approach to American civics, to economics, to the history of the United States. There are options out there. And again, I think part of this issue for parents of children who are considering and going into college is to be a better consumer of where you're sending your kids. Even at places like Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, and Stanford, is that we're waking up to the fact that these reputations, while well-earned, are fraying. My whole family on my wife's side are all UCLA Bruins. But at the same time, they've learned through me and some of the work that we're doing that UCLA today, or USC, or Stanford, depending on the department, is not the same school that they went to. And so they need to be better consumers of that. At the same time, I think donors are becoming much more aware. We're certainly seeing this in the wake of October 7th. We're seeing donors to colleges and universities being much more selective about the kinds of programs that they'll support, and I think that's a good thing. You're also seeing the growth of these civics institutes at flagship public universities, mostly, again, in red states where we're seeing this reform happen, but the University of Texas, University of Florida, University of Tennessee, Ohio State University, just in the last couple of years have launched new centers for American civics on their major flagship public university campuses to provide an oasis of free thought, but also, I think, a balanced approach to American history and political science. And I think we're going to see more public universities, more donors to private institutions getting much more involved in providing these alternatives, more balanced alternatives on their favorite college campuses.
Now, for the faculty at these universities that may have their own biases and they're stuck in this way, how can they get out of that? To bring diversity of thinking and an element of respect, because a lot of times when people have opinions, they might push the students in a certain direction and make the other side look really bad.
Yeah.
Is there a way out?
What we're beginning to see is with the moves by the Trump administration with the creation of these civics institutes on major college campuses, with the greater importance placed by donors in support of viewpoint diversity in academia, you're starting to see even more progressive faculty understand that there's a real problem in the house, if you will. I have a number of friends who are progressive academics and scholars. And when you get a chance to have a cup of coffee with them and sit down and say, now, come on, we know there's a problem here, that if you're a conservative student on this campus, whatever campus we're talking about, chances are they're not getting a chance to express themselves. They will allow that this is a real problem that's now been exposed, which, let's be clear, the future of American higher education is in many ways the future of America. Not completely, but as we think about the future of the American project, we have to understand that if we don't answer these questions right in higher education, if we're not able to truly continue this movement towards free speech and academic freedom, toward a balanced approach toward American civics, towards a balanced approach towards meritocracy and what we're teaching in the high schools and making sure those students are prepared for higher education, that will in large part determine the future of America. And so when I have a chance to talk across with friends who are progressive academics, they understand that a problem has been revealed. The question becomes, how far will these reforms go? I am optimistic. I think the steps taken by the Trump administration are by and large positive for bringing awareness to the problem. I am optimistic to see donors now much more aware of what they're investing in. They're not just writing checks to their alma mater. They want to see where this money is going, and they want to make sure that it's going towards good ideas and promoting, again, the American experiment and the American project. I'm excited about these new civics institutes that are appearing in places like Texas and Florida and North Carolina and Tennessee and Ohio and so forth. But we're just in the first few years of this because, again, I think this all began with COVID, but then was followed by these other four elements. And we're still, Churchill would say, in relation to World War II, we're not at the beginning of the end, but we might be at the end of the beginning. And I don't even know if we're at the end of the beginning of this movement, but I know that there are reasons for optimism, but it's really going to require Americans, what I would say, awakening to the awokening that's happened on American college campuses.
Pete Peterson, Dean of School of Public Policy at Pepperdine, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Great to be here.
Let us know what you think about what's going on in California universities and how they can improve. Or do you think they're doing well already? You can always comment or email us at siamak@californiainsider.com. Remember that we read all of your emails and comments. I'm Siamak Khorrami. This is California Insider. We'll see you next time.